The Bentley kissed the oak tree at 50 miles per hour. Chrome shattered. Glass exploded in diamond fragments across black leather seats. Through the spider-webbed windshield, manicured fingers trembled against a bleeding forehead. He emerged from the roadside like smoke made flesh. Broad shoulders, calloused hands that knew both changing diapers and checking for broken bones. Easy now. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through midnight emergencies and sleepless nights. She felt herself lifted with surgeon-like precision from twisted metal and the acrid smell of leaking fuel. Her designer heels scraped gravel as consciousness flickered. "Wait, please." But autumn wind filled the space where he'd stood. No business card, no hero's speech, just tire tracks leading into darkness, and the haunting question of why a man who moved like military training would vanish from a woman whose net worth could rebuild his entire world. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through paper-thin walls at 3:57 a.m. Caleb Stone's eyes opened to stained ceiling tiles and the familiar weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. The heating bill notice sat unopened next to Ruby's watercolor flowers, art that looked more like architectural blueprints than a 7-year-old's imagination. His daughter had his eye for precision, even in innocent creativity. Coffee maker gurgled to life, filling silence with promises of caffeine and another day of making ends meet. The engineering degree hidden in his sock drawer might as well have been written in a dead language. 3 years ago, when Melissa's medical bills started arriving like hurricane waves, he'd traded his corner office for grease stains and honest work. Ruby's gentle breathing remained the only sound that mattered in their cramped world. Caleb pulled on work clothes, fabric rough against skin that had once known Egyptian cotton and boardroom handshakes. The transition from designing aircraft navigation systems to welding broken exhaust pipes had been jarring, but Ruby needed stability more than she needed a father chasing ghosts of his former life. Henderson's auto repair sat between a laundromat and a diner wasn't much to look at, but old Pete paid fair wages and didn't ask questions about backgrounds or fallen dreams. By the time Ruby's school bus disappeared around the corner, Caleb had diagnosed 2 brake problems and replaced a radiator. His hands moved with confidence of someone who understood how things worked, whether aircraft guidance systems or temperamental carburetors. The other mechanics had nicknamed him Professor, a title that stuck despite protests. They didn't know about sleepless nights researching Ruby's mild asthma or the way he still reached for Melissa's pillow in his sleep. The black sedan pulled into the garage just after noon, engine purring with contentment of German engineering. Caleb didn't look up until he heard the voice that would haunt his thoughts for days to come. Clear, educated, carrying determination that reminded him of Ruby when she'd decided to learn chess. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone who might have been near Riverside Road on Tuesday evening." She stood in the doorway wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than his monthly rent, but chosen carefully to look ordinary. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, expensive perfume traded for something that wouldn't announce her presence. But money had a way of clinging to people, visible in how she held herself, and quiet confidence that came from never checking bank balances before purchases. The small bandage on her forehead was only evidence of Tuesday's chaos. "I'm sorry to bother you. There was an accident. Someone helped me, and I never got to thank them properly." Her eyes moved across the garage with focused intensity of someone who wasn't used to being told no. Pete Henderson emerged from his office, wiping hands on a grease-stained rag. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice carried warm suspicion of a man who'd spent 40 years dealing with people who usually showed up when they needed something. She smiled, the kind of expression that could charm information out of Swiss bankers. "I'm trying to find someone who was very kind to me earlier this week." Caleb's hand stilled on his wrench. Tuesday evening felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Memory sharp enough to cut glass. Training had kicked in before conscious thought when he'd seen the Bentley leave the road like a silver bullet. He'd pulled her from wreckage, stayed just long enough to ensure she was breathing steadily, then disappeared before sirens arrived. Heroes attracted attention, and attention led to questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Wish I could help?" Pete said, genuinely apologetic. "Anything specific about this guy?" She hesitated, gaze moving like a searchlight. He seemed to know what he was doing. Medical training, maybe. Military background. The words hit Caleb like cold water, accurate enough to make him wonder if she'd been more aware during the rescue than he'd realized. The conversation felt like quicksand, each word pulling him deeper into situations he'd been trying to avoid. He'd helped because helping was what you did when you had skills, and they had need. No ulterior motives, no desire for recognition. But gratitude had a way of complicating simple gestures, turning good deeds into obligations nobody had asked to incur. "If anyone does remember something," she said, pausing at the garage entrance with eyes that seemed to see through metal and machinery, "my name is Vera. I'll be staying at the Riverside Inn for a few more days." After she left, the garage felt different, as if her presence had shifted atoms in the air. Vera. The name fit her somehow, elegant but not pretentious. He wondered if it was real or just another carefully constructed piece of whatever identity she was wearing. That evening, while Ruby worked on homework, buzzing with finger paint energy, Caleb found himself driving past the Riverside Inn. The parking lot held usual travel-weary vehicles, but sitting near the entrance was a black sedan that looked like it could cruise the autobahn while playing symphonies. Ruby followed his gaze with curiosity of a child who noticed everything adults tried to hide. "That's a really pretty car. Do you think the person who owns it is nice?" Their routine unfolded with comfortable predictability. Homework while Caleb prepared dinner, bath time with enough bubbles to satisfy rubber duck armies, story time, and checking closets for monsters. Ruby had inherited Melissa's practical nature, but Caleb's imagination, making bedtime an adventure in creative problem-solving. Tonight she wanted stories about brave knights who saved people, a request that hit closer to home than she could know. The knock on his door came just after 8:30, soft enough that he almost missed it over the dishwasher's final cycle. Vera stood on his doorstep holding a paper bag and wearing an expression both apologetic and determined. She'd found him somehow, and now there was nowhere left to hide from Tuesday evening's consequences. He unlocked the door but left the chain engaged, creating a gap for conversation, but not wide enough for her to see poverty that furnished his living room. "I asked around town about mechanics with military backgrounds. Your name came up. Small towns had invisible communication networks, threads of information connecting everyone whether they wanted connection or not. I think you might be the person who helped me Tuesday night." The statement hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Caleb said, words feeling hollow. "The paramedic said whoever helped me knew exactly how to check for spinal injuries, and you have a small cut on your left hand that looks about 3 days old." She gestured toward his hand, and he realized he'd been unconsciously hiding it. The cut had come from broken glass during rescue, minor injury he'd ignored in his hurry to disappear. Ruby's voice drifted from her bedroom, sleepy call for water. "Daddy," she called, voice carrying slight wheeze that always made his chest tighten. How old is she? Vera asked, expression softening into understanding. 7. She has asthma. Sometimes she needs extra attention at night. The admission felt dangerous, like revealing classified information. But something in Vera's eyes reminded him of social workers and doctors who understood that fear for a child's well-being trumped everything else. I understand, she said, stepping back. This conversation isn't over, but I'll be in town for a few more days. She held up the paper bag. Just dinner from that Italian place on Main Street. No strings attached. Inside were containers of food that smelled like herbs and garlic, and cooking that took time and care. Enough for 2 meals, maybe 3 if he was careful with portions. Ruby was sitting up in bed when he checked on her, stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. Who was at the door, Daddy? Just someone I helped the other day. She wanted to say thank you. Ruby nodded as if this made perfect sense. Was she nice? I think so, but sometimes it's hard to tell right away. Maybe you could be friends with her. You don't have very many friends, Daddy. The observation hit like a gentle punch to the solar plexus, accurate and innocent and devastating all at once. That night, Caleb sat eating Italian food that tasted better than anything he'd had in months, wondering if Vera knew what her simple gesture meant to someone who'd been choosing between electric bills and fresh vegetables. The next morning brought rain and grey sky that made the garage feel like a cave. Pete was already there, nursing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. That woman came by again yesterday evening. Asked more questions about you specifically. Pete's eyes stayed sharp and watchful. Nothing too personal. Just wanted to know how long you'd been working here, whether you had family. Said to tell you she'd be at Murphy's Diner this morning around 10 if you wanted to continue your conversation. By 9:45, Caleb was standing in Murphy's parking lot trying to convince himself that walking away was still an option. 3 years of keeping everyone at arm's length had created safe but lonely existence. Ruby's words echoed in his thoughts about not having many friends, hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. Vera was sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, position giving clear view of entrance. She'd ordered coffee and blueberry pancakes, comfort food that seemed at odds with her carefully maintained appearance. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said as he joined her. Up close, he could see faint lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy responsibilities. I owe you my life. That's not the kind of debt you walk away from without trying to say thank you properly. Caleb stirred sugar into his coffee, delaying tactic. You don't owe me anything. Anyone with basic first aid training would have done the same thing. But not everyone would have stayed calm under pressure, or known exactly how to assess spinal injuries in the dark. You're not just anyone, are you, Caleb? The use of his name sent shock through his system. I used to be someone else, but that was a long time ago. Now I'm just a mechanic trying to raise his daughter and pay his bills. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, but something about Vera's steady attention made honesty feel safer than deflection. He found himself telling her about Melissa's illness and medical bills that had consumed his savings like wildfire. About trading his corner office for honest work that paid bills but couldn't touch student loans. About learning to navigate single parenthood while grieving the woman who'd been his anchor in every storm. I'm sorry, she said when he finished. Losing someone you love changes everything, doesn't it? Makes you question what really matters. What about you? What brings someone who drives a Bentley to a small town in Ohio? She hesitated, fingers tracing patterns on the table surface. I'm looking for something. I'm looking for... Or maybe trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. Before he could press for details, her phone buzzed with blocked call. Her expression shifted from open to guarded in a heartbeat. Ex-boyfriend, she said, the lie smooth but not quite truthful. Some people have trouble accepting when something's over. They talked for another hour, carefully navigating dangerous topics. She told him about growing up in Chicago, about parents who'd expected perfection and delivered criticism with surgical precision. He shared stories about Ruby's curiosity and creativity, the way she approached the world with fearless enthusiasm. The conversation felt natural, despite careful boundaries, like dancing around landmines while pretending the ground was safe. When they finally left, afternoon sun had burned through morning's grey clouds. "Thank you for breakfast," she said, walking him to his truck. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that doesn't involve takeout containers?" Before he could answer, her phone rang again. This time she looked at caller ID, and her expression shifted to something that looked like fear. "I have to take this," she said, stepping away and lowering her voice to whisper. When she returned, her demeanor had changed completely. The relaxed woman who'd shared breakfast had been replaced by someone preparing for battle. "I have to go, but I'd like to see you again, if you're willing." She handed him a slip of paper with a phone number. "Call me when you're ready for that dinner conversation. But Caleb, be careful who you trust. Sometimes the people who seem safest are the ones who can hurt you most." A week later, they met for dinner at Romano's, a quiet restaurant outside town that specialized in homemade pasta and minding its own business. Vera arrived wearing a simple dress, elegant without screaming expensive. But something was different tonight, tension in her movements suggesting she was operating on multiple levels of awareness. She kept glancing toward the entrance, phone face up on the table where she could see incoming calls immediately. They ordered wine and pasta, conversation easier than their breakfast meeting, but carrying undercurrents of things neither was ready to discuss. She asked about Ruby's school and his work, questions that seemed genuinely interested rather than politely obligatory. "Do you have children?" he asked naturally. Her expression shifted, happiness replaced by grief. "No. I had a sister, though. Younger. She would have been about Ruby's age when she—" The sentence trailed off, heavy with implication. Before either could navigate the emotional minefield they'd stumbled into, Vera's phone buzzed with text message. She glanced at screen, and her face went completely white, color draining away. "I have to go. Right now. I'm sorry, Caleb. This was lovely, but I have to leave immediately." The transformation was so complete and sudden that he wondered if he'd imagined the relaxed woman sharing dinner with him moments before. "Vera, wait. What's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble?" She paused, looking back with eyes that held more fear than he'd seen since Tuesday night's accident. "The kind of trouble that follows you. The kind that hurts people who get too close." He followed her to the parking lot, where she was fumbling with car keys with shaking hands. "Let me help," he said, gently taking keys and unlocking her door. "Whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone. You don't understand. The people looking for me, they don't care about collateral damage. Anyone who gets involved becomes a target." The admission revealed more than she'd probably intended. "Where will you go?" he asked. She laughed, sound sharp and bitter. "Somewhere else. Somewhere they haven't found me yet." In that moment, standing in the restaurant parking lot while someone he barely knew prepared to disappear from his life, Caleb made a decision that would have seemed insane to his former self. "Come home with me. Just for tonight. You have a daughter. I can't put her at risk. The fact that her first concern was for Ruby's safety told him more about her character than hours of conversation had revealed. Ruby's staying at the neighbor's tonight. She hesitated, then nodded. Just for tonight. But if anything happens, you get as far away as possible and don't look back. His apartment looked different through Vera's eyes. Smaller but somehow more honest. She moved through the space cataloging exits and potential threats. Behavior so automatic, it suggested professional training or hard-earned experience. Nice place. It feels like a home. They sat drinking coffee, television providing background noise. Vera had relaxed slightly, but still checked her phone regularly and positioned herself where she could see both door and window. "How long have you been running?" he asked, the question emerging from growing certainty rather than curiosity. She looked at him sharply. "Former military, remember? I recognize tactical awareness when I see it." 6 months, she said finally. Give or take. Before he could ask what she meant, her phone rang with sharp, insistent tone of someone who expected to be answered immediately. "I have to take this," she said, moving toward the kitchen for privacy. Her voice carried anyway, revealing fragments of conversation that sounded more like business negotiation than personal call. "I told you I needed more time. The situation is more complicated than we originally discussed." Pause. "No, I understand the stakes. But rushing this will compromise everything we've worked for." Another pause. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, the responsibility is yours, not mine." When she returned, her expression had hardened into armor. "I have to leave in the morning. Early. Before sunrise." "Can I ask why?" She considered the question with careful attention of someone weighing security against honesty. "There are people who think I have something that belongs to them. They're wrong, but they're not the kind of people who accept being wrong gracefully." They talked until midnight, carefully avoiding dangerous topics while sharing safer pieces of histories and hopes. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Caleb offered her his bed while he took the couch. Sleep didn't come easily, and around 3 a.m. he heard her checking locks and windows with systematic thoroughness of someone who'd learned that safety was something you created rather than assumed. When he woke at sunrise, she was gone. The bed had been made with military precision, and there was a note on the kitchen table in neat handwriting. "Thank you for everything. You're a good man, Caleb Stone. Take care of yourself and that beautiful daughter. Don't try to find me." Below her signature, she'd drawn a small heart that looked like it had been added impulsively. 2 weeks after Vera's disappearance, the black SUV appeared in the garage parking lot like a storm cloud on clear day. Government plates and windows tinted dark enough to hide occupants, the kind of vehicle that announced official business. 2 men in expensive suits emerged and walked toward the garage with confident stride of people used to being taken seriously. "Caleb Stone?" the older agent asked, flashing FBI badge. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about someone you may have met recently." A woman named Vera Cross. The name hit Caleb like cold water, confirmation that Vera had been using an alias and that whatever trouble she was running from had federal implications. Agent Harrison smiled, expression both reassuring and predatory. "Ms. Cross was involved in a serious incident a few weeks ago. We have reason to believe you may have had contact with her around that time." The phrasing was careful, designed to encourage cooperation while leaving room for different interpretations. This would have been around October 15th, Tuesday evening, Riverside Road. There was a motor vehicle accident involving a luxury sedan. I might have stopped to help, he said finally, admission feeling like stepping onto thin ice. But I don't usually get names. Is she okay? The question was genuine, based on concern that had nothing to do with federal investigations. Ms. Cross is safe, Harrison said, and Caleb felt tension leave his shoulders. But she's also missing, and we have concerns about her well-being. The younger agent looked up from his notebook. Mr. Stone, are you aware that Ms. Cross is a person of interest in a federal investigation involving corporate espionage and the theft of classified technology? The question hit like a physical blow, recontextualizing everything he thought he knew about Vera. Corporate espionage. Technology. The kind of charges that carried serious prison time. She's very good at deception, Harrison said, tone carrying something like sympathy. Very skilled at making people believe she's someone she's not. If she contacts you again, we need you to call us immediately. They left him with business cards and instructions to call if Valentina attempted contact. That evening, while Ruby worked on homework, Caleb stared at his phone, debating whether to delete Vera's number. If she was a federal fugitive involved in corporate espionage, keeping her number felt like harboring evidence. But deleting it felt like admitting everything between them had been fake. His phone rang just after 11 p.m., blocked number cutting through apartment silence. Caleb? Vera's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else to turn to. Where are you? Are you safe? For now. Caleb, I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings was true. Whatever else happens, whatever you might hear about me, that part was real. The admission felt both reassuring and terrifying. The federal agents came to see me today, he said. The silence that followed felt heavy with calculations and fears. What did you tell them? The truth. That I helped someone in a car accident and didn't get their name. They said you're involved in corporate espionage. They said you stole classified technology. Another pause, and when she spoke, her voice carried weight of someone who had been expecting this conversation for months. They're not wrong, but they don't understand why. Something in her tone suggested the story was more complicated than theft and betrayal. Why would you risk everything for technology? Because the technology was mine to begin with. Because the company I worked for stole my research and then tried to bury it when they realized what it could do. Because sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it. The explanation recontextualized everything the federal agents had told him. What kind of technology? Medical devices, artificial heart components that could save thousands of lives. Technology that my former employer is sitting on because they can't figure out how to maximize profit margins. Your sister, she had heart problems. The connection felt obvious once he'd made it. She died because the technology that could have saved her was locked away in corporate vaults while lawyers argued about patent rights. Her breathing caught, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. She was 7 years old, Caleb? The same age as your Ruby. The parallel hit him like physical blow, recontextualizing everything about motivation and justice and the lengths people would go to protect children they loved. The research I took could help children like Ruby, kids with congenital heart defects. But my former employer would rather let them die than risk a product launch that might not maximize shareholder value. Before Caleb could respond, he heard voices in the background, urgent and getting closer. I have to go. They found me. Caleb, if anything happens to me, there's something hidden in your truck, under the spare tire. Don't let them bury this technology. Don't let my sister's death be meaningless." The line went dead. He sat processing implications of everything Vera had told him. Corporate espionage took on different meaning when stolen technology could save children's lives. Getting involved meant risking everything he'd built with Ruby, potentially exposing his daughter to dangers he couldn't calculate. The responsible choice was to call Agent Harrison and report the conversation. Instead, he found himself moving toward his truck with purposeful determination. Under the spare tire was a small waterproof container. Inside were USB drives, documents, and technical specifications for medical devices more advanced than anything he'd seen during his aerospace career. The paperwork revealed technology that could revolutionize cardiac care for children. As he stared at evidence of Vera's crime and motivation, Caleb realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just his immediate future, but the kind of man he wanted to be for Ruby. He thought about Ruby, trusting him to make choices that would keep her safe. He thought about Vera's sister, dead at 7, because life-saving technology had been locked away for corporate reasons. He thought about all the other children who might die while shareholders debated profit margins. The decision, when it came, felt both surprising and completely natural. He closed the container and returned it to its hiding place, then deleted Agent Harrison's contact information from his phone. 3 months later, Caleb sat in a congressional hearing room watching lawmakers question representatives from Harrison Pharmaceuticals about delayed medical device approvals and profit-driven research suppression. The technology Vera had died protecting was now in hands of congressional investigators and medical researchers who understood its life-saving potential. Ruby, healthy and happy, colored pictures while her father testified about corporate responsibility and moral obligations that transcended legal technicalities. The story had become bigger than any of them had imagined, transforming from corporate espionage case into national conversation about medical research priorities and human cost of profit-driven healthcare decisions. Vera's name was cleared posthumously, her motivations understood and honored by lawmakers who'd lost children to preventable medical conditions. The technology she'd died protecting was fast-tracked through regulatory approval, funded by congressional appropriations rather than corporate investment strategies. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet, Caleb still thought about the woman who'd shared breakfast with him at Murphy's diner and worried about putting his daughter at risk. Vera had been right about one thing. Sometimes the people who seemed safest were the ones who could hurt you most. But she'd been wrong about something too. Sometimes the people who seemed most dangerous were actually the ones willing to sacrifice everything to protect children they'd never met. Heroes came in unexpected forms, and sometimes salvation looked like corporate espionage committed by someone who'd lost everything and decided that other families shouldn't have to lose anything at all. In the end, Vera had been exactly who she'd claimed to be. Someone looking for meaning in the aftermath of loss. Someone trying to figure out what to do with the rest of her life. She'd found her answer in the hardest possible way, but she'd found it.